so many issues on its plate, and I think there's a certain fear that if you go too far, too fast with Cuba, you may alienate people you need, whose support you need in some of these other issues. So I think we must continue to move ahead. We must continue to press for changes in the policy towards Cuba. But do so realistically, because I don't see sweeping changes coming about. Nonetheless, we must remind ourselves we're much better off now than we were under George Bush, not only with respect to Cuba policy, with respect to so many other things. So I've been working at it now for 52 years. I hope I have a few years left, and that by the time I leave this earth, we will at long last have normal and sensible relations with Cuba. I once said, and I'll end on this, that Cuba seems to have the same effect on American administrations that the full moon once had on werewolves. And I'm hoping that the Obama administration will end the spell. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you guys very much for having me here. I'd like to thank CSI so much for inviting the National Committee to Free the Cuban Five to speak here this evening. The Cuban Five are 5 Cuban individuals who came to this country originally in 1990. They came unarmed, without any weapons. They didn't come to collect any information on the United States government. Nevertheless, in 1998, they were arrested by the United States government, charged with conspiracy to commit espionage as well as some murder charges, and were sentenced collectively to 4 life sentences plus 75 years. So you may be asking yourself what happened in between 1990 and 1998 that would get such harsh sentences for a crime they seemingly were not involved in. And inevitably, what happened and what the Cuban Five were here to do is to collect information on groups that live there, that operate and their members live in the United States, primarily in South Florida, inside of Miami, who have been planning for many, many years, and really since the Cuban Revolution in 1959, the 50th year of which is being celebrated this year, have planned terrorist actions against Cuba. This is something that many people do not know in the United States, and this is why this is a very important issue inside of Cuba, the issue of the Cuban Five. There's a number of bombings, there's all sorts of psychological warfare, there's of course the blockade of Cuba that has been leveled on that country for many years. And the United States government, for really the entire existence of the Cuban Revolution, has given aid and comfort to many of these groups in Miami: Brothers to the Rescue, the Cuban American National Foundation, Alpha 66, etc., and various networks that these individuals work through. And we'll hear some from Mr. Pertiera about the case of Jorge Posada, and he's one of these individuals like Orlando Bosch that lives in Miami, is celebrated, supported by the United States government, that has been training and openly admits that they attack Cuba, they plan bombings, they plan assassinations. This is not something that they hide. Yet, despite the fact you're not supposed to be able to plan terrorist attacks against other countries inside the United States, these groups have been allowed to continue almost in complete impunity planning these actions inside of the United States. In 1968, Orlando Bosch fired a bazooka at a Polish ship in the port of Miami. And you know, now every year they celebrate an Orlando Bosch Day. It's a holiday in Miami. And it's interesting to note that the Cuban Five, when they came here, as I said, came unarmed. They committed no crimes. They collected no information against the United States government. And in fact, in the first trial, it came out that espionage was certainly not something that would hold up, because in fact, they were only looking towards these organizations that were planning terrorism towards Cuba. So unless the United States government wanted to take ownership for those actions, it would be, it seemed not to make that much sense for them to support or to say that they were committing espionage against the United States. Nevertheless, they were convicted. So there's a number of issues at this case, and I think it gets to the heart of everything that goes on, but the primary issue in the case of the Cuban Five is the issue of venue, the location of the trial. The first trial was held in Miami. It is argued, and we believe correctly, in 2005, the United Nations said that Miami was not a correct venue, and that this is the United Nations group on arbitrary detentions and working group on arbitrary detentions, and that the arrest of the Cuban Five was both arbitrary and against international law. The issue for that, of course, is, as we know, Miami being the base of these anti-Castro and anti-Cuban government organizations, there's a significant amount of pressure that is put on any individual who expresses any sort of, not even necessarily neutral, but even mildly pro-Castro viewpoint, if you even really want to call it that. There's been a number of bombings, intimidations, and inside of the media, of course, there's a significant drumbeat against Cuba. And so Miami as a venue was a place inherently that people who were being depicted as Cuban agents were not able to get a fair trial in, and this is something that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals recognized in 2006 or 2005 when they heard this case that was originally tried in 2001. And the other outstanding issue is Gerardo Hernandez, who is one of the Cuban Five, who has 2 murder convictions. Now, he's charged with murder because Brothers to the Rescue, which is an organization, one of these ones I've been talking to in Miami, which routinely plans flights that illegally fly over Cuban airspace, Gerardo was reporting back to Cuba on these flights, inevitably to make sure the government knew about any attempts to illegally overfly their space and, commit any sort of attacks. And one of these planes that had left from Miami was eventually shot down, and those individuals died in that crash, and Gerardo Hernandez was charged with their murder. That is, he was charged with their murder for Cuba actually practicing what is, well accepted in international law and that we hear about all the time. Planes illegally entering an airspace was down, and especially with the history of thousands of Cubans being killed, and not just Cubans. In 1997, there was an Italian tourist who was killed in the Tropicana Hotel, I believe, inside of Havana, when a bomb was placed in a couch, behind a couch that he was sitting on. And routinely bombings and foiled bombings are found in these hotels because these organizations feel that if they kill a number of tourists inside of the tourist areas of Cuba, they will be able to prevent people from coming to Cuba for tourism, and the government will lose a significant amount of the money it gains from tourism, which is a major industry for the Cuban government. And so this is something that doesn't just affect, Cubans per se, but, people all over the world from many different countries who have been victimized by this terrorism. And the Cuban Five have been fighting since then for their freedom. They've been fighting for their complete freedom and not any sort of reduction, because they did not commit the crimes that they were held forward to do, and that this is a political case, or the motivations of it are in fact political. There have been 3 trials so far. The original trial in 2001 where they were found guilty. A second trial in 2005 where the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in Atlanta, if you know anything about appeals courts, oftentimes they have a 3-judge panel that hears cases. The 3-judge panel said that the Cuban Five case was a perfect storm of prejudice, primarily looking at the issue of venue and the case being inside of Miami. And they, in fact, overturned those convictions because they said that it could not stand. And the Justice Department appealed those decisions. And following that, the full panel of the 11th Circuit Court heard the case in 2006, and they returned a verdict which overturned the 3-judge panel and reinstituted the sentences against the Cuban Five. And now, legally, where the case stands is there's an appeal in front of the Supreme Court. The attorney who is appealing for the Supreme Court says that all of the decisions of the case, and there's a number of issues, not just venue. Another one is the Batson issue, which, if you know anything about legal terms, is it says that you can't strike a juror from a jury because of their race. So there's a number of issues, but venue is a central issue. But inevitably, the rulings from the second ruling by the 11th Circuit Court of the full panel are actually out of sync with rulings of a similar vein on these issues and on these different contestations, which make a very strong case for a case, or I guess an application to have the case heard by the Supreme Court. And that case is hopefully, we're going to hear about that this year. A number of individuals all around the world have supported it. Numerous Nobel Peace Prize winners, Wole Soyinka, who people may know, who's a Nigerian author, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, among others, have all supported the case of the Cuban Five. But I guess what it really comes down to is the issue of the case of the Cuban Five, and how it's often portrayed is, whether it's one side is varying degrees of support